Welcome, friends, to the Mindfulness Advantage Show. I'm your host, George E. Green, founder and creator of the Mindfulness Advantage Advanced Immersive Training and Mentoring Systems. Your Mindfulness Advantage is always rooted in the philosophy and practice of power with rather than power over. I partner with, train, and mentor people from all walks of life, from blue collar to business executive, in an elegantly simple yet profoundly powerful set of tools and daily practices that can and will create for you measurable and sustainable life upgrades, empowering you to achieve personal mastery and greater productivity through your daily practice of mindfulness. For more information, inspiration, and to schedule your own complimentary consultation, log on to themindfulnessadvantage.com or contact me here on the Plus via your private message. Thank you, friends, for staying with us for the next hour. Joining us this evening in our guest panel are our friends Pamela Zeman and Roy Montero, as we explore your direct path to reaching and achieving your highest human potential through the science and art of mindfulness and neuroplasticity. Pamela and Roy will be joining us in just a moment after our first segment, Your Moments in Mindfulness. Whether we are mindfully aware or not, the challenge and frustration most of us experience and face on a daily basis is the reality that we have become quite literally wired for distraction. We are living in and steeped in a culture of massive distraction, social media, multitasking, continuing crisis, competition, and division, where we find ourselves seemingly more connected, yet equally disconnected and disassociated. Now, no one is immune to the negative effects of today's rising challenges and stressors, and for many, the ever-increasing challenges and associated stress of our rapidly accelerating world simply becomes the new normal, when there is nothing normal about it. So science has determined that on average, most people are only fully present, focused, aware, and on purpose as little as 3% of our waking lives. Now that's an amazing metric. So what does that mean? It means the other 97% of the time we are being driven by and ruled by our unconscious minds. Even at 3%, we do manage to accomplish things, albeit with a minimum of purpose and presence relative to our true human potential. Imagine now doubling or tripling your presence, your purpose, focus, and attention repeatedly throughout your day. Then imagine further elevating and accelerating your accomplishments, your productivity and performance, your imagination, innovation, and creative problem-solving skills, all while cultivating your ability to meet, exceed, and master any and all opportunities and challenges life can throw at you. Friends, great leaders, champions, and masters of all disciplines and practices share common keys to their excellence of achievement. Their extraordinary success in fully realizing and exceeding their visions, goals, and outcomes all began with developing and acquiring simple daily habits and practices that over time fully aligned every aspect of their lives and their worlds with one singular outcome: their fulfillment. We are here today together to identify and discover your new roadmap to your elevated human potential and performance, accelerated personal evolution, and your innate ability to imagine and envision your greatest outcomes, then make them come true. This is the science and the art of your own mindfulness advantage. Welcome, friends, and let's play. So again, I'm going to bring on and invite into the hangout our friends Pamela Zeman and Roy Montero. Pamela and Roy, thanks for being on the show.
Hey,
And
thanks for having me, George. It's a great topic.
yeah, indeed. And Roy, thank you, sir, for bringing your heart and your presence to our
My
show.
pleasure, George. Thank you.
Yay. So let's talk a little bit about your potential experiences, how you experience and deal with frustration and interruption. And we'll start with Pamela, ladies first.
Alrighty. Well, when you sent the promo out, I thought, okay, so interruptions, distractions, and resistances. It's pretty easy to see all the interruptions around us and the distractions, but when I thought about resistances, I started thinking about my mind and my subconscious mind. Like, if I had a thought when I was a kid, like maybe my mom sold her soul to, you know, feed me or whatever, my dad sold his soul, I would be naturally resisting anything having to do with money. And so if my mind is constantly resisting that thought, like, I don't want to sell my soul, how can I ever create anything with that running in the background?
Indeed. And so my question would be, how's that been working for you?
Yeah, well, that's why I'm really glad to have the awareness
Hmm.
about the resistance that could be there and how to override that.
Yeah. So just a quick reminder, everybody, our friends who are in the show with us live, is you're just as important as anyone in this conversation. And so we're inviting you to get off the bench and get in the game and throw down with some questions and comments. I'm going to swing back to your query and your question about the nature of resistance. And first, let's do a shout out here and say hello to our friends Phil Boyer and Margarita Crystal Lotus and Nicole Levac and Christine L. Bowen. CLB is in the house with us. Good evening, sister. Thank you all for being here and for commenting. And just a reminder, you're watching the Mindfulness Advantage TV show. And I'm your host, Georgie Green, and we have Pamela Zeman and Roy Montero in the show. Pamela, this is a great question, very illuminating and generative, quite simply, because we encounter resistance in all its forms in a lot of different ways. First and foremost, we associate it being resistance with ourselves, our personality. And the epiphany, the awareness here is that contemplative neuroscience and neurophysiology has determined that our brains are wired for familiarity. And what that means is when we make a commitment, a new commitment, and it requires a stretch, let's say someone decides they're going to commit to go into the gym for a year, and a year ends up being about 2.5 to 3 weeks before the commitment wanes and fails. It has everything to do with the fact that your neurophysiology is wired for the old familiar pattern, and it will manifest in a myriad different ways in resisting your change. So the key, how do we manage that, is one, be aware that the same process that generates your resistance is how you learn. We learn through repetition and resting the entirety of our attention on one thing and do that for a sustainable amount of time. Um, that's the reason why you don't stab yourself in the face with a fork when you're eating dinner. It's something that's learned. It becomes automatic. Two, then the art and science of mindfulness allows us to become aware of what operates up to 97% in our unconscious minds. So a great question. Roy, what do you have? You have any questions so far tonight?
Well, I want to know where my thoughts come from. So I've always been fascinated with the subconscious mind. It's like, okay, how can I be aware of my subconscious mind when it's subconscious, unconscious? And if I have a thought, and I go, where'd that come from? I have no idea. I don't think I read it anywhere. I don't think I saw it anywhere. And it's like, it's just there. Can I assume that it came from my unconscious, subconscious mind, George?
Well, it's a great question, and boy, that just invites us to go on a bunch of rabbit trails. So I'm going to do my best to sort of grab them all up and put it into one straight theme and stream of consciousness. I too have thoughts. Where they come from is the amazing thing is your brain consumes 25% of the oxygen and glucose in your blood. It's this little area right here, and it has an amazing amount of neurological cells. I read somewhere, may or may not be true, that there are as many brain cells in your brain as there are stars in the known universe. And they have proven that your brain is this vast repository. You may not remember something from your childhood or from yesterday, but your brain has stored it quite simply and does. So our brains are as an instrument of awareness and an organ that manages and sustains stasis and balance throughout the body, in theory, is the origin of our thoughts. But here's the amazing thing, is that many people are not aware of this. The heart, your heart, has more neurological cells in it than it does muscle cells. Your heart has a connection, a two-way highway that connects it to every organ in your body, including your brain, with the exception of your spleen. And the reality is, and especially when you consider the heart from the traditional Chinese model, they call the heart the emperor organ. And the reality here is they have done, those people, the scientists, did an amazing experiment where they hooked hundreds of people up, did baselines, and then put them in front of a monitor that would randomize images that were either very pleasing or very disturbing. And what they determined with every single subject, was that the heart responded to the stimulus anywhere from half a second to 3 seconds before the eyes and the brains received it. Does that make sense? So
it does. And you were talking about familiarity, and it got me thinking about this play I was in, Becky's New Cars. The lead role had almost 2 hours of lines that I had to memorize.
Mm-hmm.
And when I would go to sleep at night, those lines would keep me awake. I couldn't even sleep because the lines were just going over and over and over my head, 2 hours worth of monologue. So it's really interesting how I wasn't even thinking that, but it was still there running in my brain.
Well, part of that is as a result of your immersion in studying the lines and memorizing the lines.
Right.
Just in the last couple of weeks, I had 2 dream nights in a row where the primary work I was doing all day, apparently I didn't think I was finished because I did it throughout the night when I was working. So, but the point of the tests with the heart is they have scientifically proven that the heart as a sensory and emotional organ quite literally transcends time and space, because it can respond to something that has not shown up. And so for a lot of people, that's pretty solid beginning proof of our heart, what we call our gut or our intuition, being measurable. And so sometimes, Roy, when we receive an epiphany, not just a random thought, but inspiration, some call it divine inspiration, I believe it's coming through us because of the union and communion, the partnership between our brain and our heart. And generally what happens is the heart is in the lead in those cases. And actually the mindfulness breathing meditation that I teach and train people in creates, as a result of the nuts and bolts, the biomechanics of a particular way of breathing and a pace of breath, creates what's called a heart-brain coherent union. Essentially, a lot of people make a comment, you may have heard, well, my head was there, but my heart wasn't in it, or vice versa. And there's quite literally a true dynamic to that. The peak performance states that athletes and maestros and artists achieve has everything to do with, one, creating coherence in the heart and the brain, and when that happens they begin to entrain each other, and those are those extraordinary states of consciousness and physicality that people practice to attain for years and years and years.
The way that you just worded that, so one of the questions I had too was exactly what you just said about the heart and the head. So when one leads with their heart over leading with their head, sometimes that's considered negative and positive, good and bad. What say you? But there's a second part to that, and that is, can they coincide? Can the heart lead first and the head follow and always be good? And it's that when the head leads and the heart follows, it's always bad? Or, how can you tell, or what would be some of the distinguishing things we need to think about before we actually act?
Yeah. All right, that's a great question. And I'm going to invite our friends and viewers to stick around for our third segment this evening, which I'll really dive into a deeper answer. And that segment is called Your New Playground. So first and foremost, I would invite you and myself and Pamela and our viewers to step off of the previous past battlefield of right and wrong, good and bad. The biophysical nature of the entrainment I'm talking about, when the heart moves into sinus rhythm and coherence, the heart's biomagnetic and bioelectric field is up to 5,000 times more potent than the brain. We measure brain waves on the skull, and now with advanced machinery, we can detect those waves off body. Advanced measurements have detected our biomagnetic, bioelectric field from our heartbeat to extend as much as 12 feet out from center. So rather than it being right or wrong, good or bad, the heart is just the dominant organ and the dominant generator, primary generator of biomagnetic and bioelectric fields. So when the heart goes into ease and coherence, generated through mindfulness and mindful breath, that biomagnetic electric field begins to entrain the brain's field, and that is a very good thing. Sometimes, and these are not absolutes, but sometimes we really require and depend on our logical minds in order to navigate through a certain situation or scenario. It's our outcome, our highest human potential, to never abandon our heart. Our heart is an integral part of that journey. Yeah, we might use our big, beautiful, linear, intellectual brains, but it's always going to be our heart that will be our rudder and our compass, if that makes sense.
And I've noticed that when I'm thinking too much, I'm not breathing as much. But when I'm in my heart and I'm feeling, that's when I notice myself taking really good breaths. And the quality of oxygen, I think, is really important too, because I open my windows at night, even though I'm up in the Northwest and it's pretty cold. But that oxygen is just so pure. I almost feel like I'm getting high off the oxygen, breathing so deeply.
Yeah.
It's really amazing.
Yeah. There's another amazing biomechanical phenomenon of the mindful breathing. What I teach is called heart harmonics, mindful breath. One is I teach people how to breathe spherically, and you're correct. When we're in our head, and when we're quite often in fight or flight or survival mode, we have learned and trained ourselves to breathe shallow. Not only that, we hold our breath. So, very interesting phenomenon. The first session I do with my client partners, they get trained, and I train them on how to return and remember spherical breath, which is essentially how you and I breathe coming out of our mother's belly. If you look at a little baby and their attention is fixed upon something and they're happy or at rest, they look like little fleshy baby balloons. Their breath is moving and expanding their body in all directions. We've forgotten that original respiratory blueprint. And so as I walk people through the stages of moving from a restricted breath into a spherical breath, boom, they have more oxygen flowing through their veins, and their brain gets more oxygen.
Mhm.
And between 35 and 45% of the people who get trained get high and dizzy when they walk through it the first time. That's quite simply because they've mastered the art of survival, because they're breathing so shallow that, let's say, your normal requirement for oxygen is 100 units. Well, because of shallow breath and holding our breath, many people have learned how to survive on 80 units or 75.
So it might be like going into a room and being afraid, and if you say, oh, I couldn't think of what to say, it's because your brain isn't getting the oxygen that it requires to actually function properly if you're holding your breath.
Yeah, that's a component, but also that's also an example of someone leaving their body and not being mindful. They're in retreat. They're in fight or flight, and rather than just pause and ask ourselves, what shall I say? What does my heart say? What do I feel right now? Without any narrative of, is this the right thing? Am I going to stick my foot in my mouth? That's mindfulness. That's curiosity. That's being aware enough, or patterning ourselves into resting our attention on what's active in the moment enough that we can recognize when we go into retreat or reaction, and then make a more intelligent, mindful choice. Maybe you can walk in the room and people notice you and you don't have to say anything. Maybe you smile. In fact, a lot of people who are committed to what I call singular presence and service and mindfulness recognize that when we hold a space of coherence and presence and mindfulness, we create ripples in our environment, in our relationships that have a positive effect. So quite often, the best thing to do is smile and be silent. So
Right, and be in your body. I think so many of us have been trained to think about the other guy or what the other guy needs, or it's always for the other guy rather than just staying in our body and really coming from that place. Like you said, we leave our bodies and we're not really there, either out of fear or trying to get approval from somebody else, and then we're just not functioning optimally.
absolutely, that is it in a nutshell, Pamela. So we're going to take a quick station break here. You are watching the Mindfulness Advantage Show. I'm your host, George E. Green, and we have Pamela Zeman and Roy Montero in our guest panel tonight. We're having a great conversation around what is our mind and why do we need a bigger brain and what's the benefits. So I'm going to jump over to comments really quick here and get caught up. Kate Bauer says, happy to be here even if my computer's brain was running slow and just barely got me here. So let's see.
Love it.
Margarita Crystal Lotus asks, do you feel that the brain is in charge of us, or is the brain like a puppy who has to be potty trained?
Wow.
Not to put too fine a point on it. That's a good question.
I love it.
I would say, and invite you all to say to your brain, you're not the boss of me. And that's what this show is about, is neuroplasticity, through resting our attention on one thing and allowing that attention, our attention, to remain there. We can sculpt our brain so that we harness the full potential of both our mind, our consciousness, and, as Roy said, the hardware. Okay, so let's see here. Robin Holland, welcome to the game. She says, I'm a latecomer. We'll have to catch the replay for most of this. Let's see. There was a good one here coming up. Yeah, question, CLB, Christine L. Bowen asks, are you then referring to the physical heart rather than the figurative heart as the energetic field? Christine, the leading edge science of today is that field, our heart field, is more than a biomagnetic and bioelectric field. It is a holographic field of information and consciousness. Imagine, as it were, that's our thought bubble or our feeling bubble or our being bubble that we're in. And when, as we have heard and read, when two or more are together and those two fields begin to commingle, well, then you're in relationship with each other without saying a word. That's why many of us who are empathic tend to take on heavy negative energy, not because we're a receptacle for it, but because we have yet to learn how to dial up and dial down our sensitivity. But we have a sense of things and a sense of a person. How many times have you had a play date with a friend and they show up and by all appearances they're fine, but you've got a feeling that something's going on and you ask them and that's confirmed? Well, that's both your intuition and the information field that's out there. So Christine follows up and says, I do believe that exercising mindfulness travels beyond scientific explanation. I agree. Science is a part of it, but not all of it. Science perhaps defines this as a phenomenon. What say you, Geo Boom? Well, first and foremost, I say, boom to you, sister. And I'm really focusing in on science today because, and this speaks to one of Pamela's questions, where at one time and even still today, people considered the sensitivity and the empathy and the intuition of the heart, that it was the third rail in business and professional relationships. You just didn't go there. The higher up the ladder, corporate ladder, you went, the less there was an importance and emphasis on the power and the role of our hearts and our spirits in business and life. That is definitely changing, and that's going to be a subject for a future Lucid Living show in December. So, Christine, yeah, I'm leaning hard on science, but the reality is our hearts are our center. They are our source, and our hearts serve as the bridge between heaven and earth, if that makes sense. And actually, again, in the Oriental paradigm of health and healing in energetics, that is considered what's called the middle dantian, the heart. You have a lower, a middle, and an upper, and it's our heart that connects everything. So it's central. Our empathy, our imagination, I believe, is definitely anchored in our heart, our feeling body, especially when it comes to inspiration and divine inspiration.
And George, speaking of that, so one of the things that has like, I don't know, baffled is the right word or not, but it's intrigued me is that I'll meet person A or I'll meet person B, and one, it's like, where you been all my life? We can talk for hours, and we have this synergy and this chemistry, and we click. And then person B, it's like pulling teeth. It's like no matter what, we can't get on the same page together. What? Yeah, what's the source of that? What? How can you explain that to me?
Well, I can certainly give it a great effort. One, we simply either resonate with or we don't, and then there are the areas in between yes and no. It may depend on the energy both of you brought to the party, and how open and engaged you were to begin with. Some people, let's say, you take a person who is enthusiastic and engaging and curious and loves to have meaningful conversations. Well, put them in a room with someone who's very internalized, very conservative, holds things close to the vest, and requires great effort to trust. We can do the math on that. There's going to be a one-way street, and generally when people are in that what would I say, contracted condition, the more someone invites them to come out, the more they retreat. So that may be a potential dynamic. There's another great effect that your mindfulness and living in and operating from your heart has. And that is, rather than engage on a verbal level or an intellectual level, again, just by being mindful, by cultivating and holding a space of what I call singular presence and listening from a mindful space. Sometimes someone who's very shy and resistive of communication and expression will find their voice. One, because they feel that they're seen and heard in a secure and sacred way. So, boom.
It's really key to have that open space and an area of trust. When I used to do the speaking circles, it's like nobody was required to speak at all, other than all the old speaking programs where you get up and it's like, okay, talk now, and then people were just coming from their mind. But when you give them the space to speak or not speak, whatever they feel like doing, this authentic voice comes out, and it's amazing. It's amazing. It's so connected with other people. They're not in their own space. It's really a higher intelligence, and the same person can speak from two different ways. And one, you just could listen all day long, and the other way, it's just mind chatter that is just running around in there.
Indeed. So to circle back to where we started today, we're getting close to our final segment, Your New Playground. The reality is science has determined that as little as 10 minutes per day of a daily mindfulness practice can indeed grow and create a denser level of connections in your brain in specific parts of your brain that are critical for balancing emotion, for emotional resilience, for decision making, memory, learning. And the amazing thing about this fact is, in their research, people who were conditioned into reactive fight or flight states of mind, those shallow breathers and breath holders, there's a specific part of the brain called the hippocampus. And with repeated fight or flight incidents, the hippocampus atrophies. And the other organ, which is the amygdala, which is responsible for processing emotions and specifically fear and anxiety, fight or flight, will grow commensurate to the atrophy of the hippocampus. And so the study that determined that growth rate of 25% in 8 weeks recognized that not only did the hippocampus recover and grow back by 25%, but the amygdala shrunk by 25%. So what does that mean to someone who's just starting out in a mindfulness practice? One, you're building a better, bigger brain. And through your mindfulness practice, you are taming and making friends with not only your monkey mind, all these random thoughts, but you're able to sit with and recognize what's active, which was unconscious before. And eventually, over time, we take all these inner arguments and oppositions and create new alignments. And so what that means is not only can you focus on your outcome, your dream, or your vision, but because you're using more of your brain power in agreement with your outcome, you accelerate your results. So it's my experience has been in nearly 9 years of training, mentoring, and coaching, and using mindfulness as a catalyst for personal evolution and growth, is the people who thought they would have the greatest challenge in slowing their mind down discovered very quickly that they had an unconscious and deep desire and hunger for balance, for presence, for a core calmness and peace. And that once we have a taste of that, quite often there's actually no going back. I want to do a quick station break. We're going to shift gears into Welcome to Your Playground. You've been watching the Mindfulness Advantage Show, and you have been enjoying my conversation with Pamela Zeman. Thank you for joining us today, Pamela.
My pleasure. Thanks.
And Roy Montero, my new friend and brother from a different mother.
Origin, my pleasure as well.
Yeah. Again, and it seems like we just scratched the surface, so the invitation, friends, is to join us again next week. Join us in the replay. Keep your comments rolling. And also, you're invited, as I open, to call me directly or email me directly and speak to me, ask your own questions. You can schedule a free complimentary consultation anytime. And so once again, thank you for joining us, friends, and Pamela and Roy. And now it is time for your new playground. The concept of your new playground is an invitation I extend to everyone, from my dear friends to my training and mentoring client partners. Here on our new playground, we play and collaborate outside of right and wrong, outside of pass or fail, outside of judgment or competition. Here on your new playground, there are only 2 ways we play together: easy and easier. Feel free to pick one. Here on your new playground, everybody plays and everybody wins. These are indeed new concepts and experiences, and they serve us in great contrast to our past experiences of struggle and diminished commitment. These are the foundational concepts and experiences of pure collaboration, of partnership, and ultimately the core philosophy of your mindfulness advantage: power with rather than power over. It's no wonder so many of us have encountered obstacles, fears, doubts, and yes, resistance to our achieving and receiving our visions and outcomes fulfilled. Contemplative neuroscience, the scientific study of the direct, generative, and measurable effects of mindfulness and meditation, have mapped for us a way forward into and toward your own zone of excellence, of your greatest potentials achieved, exceeded, and beyond. Would you trade 10 minutes of each day for your own massive life upgrade? One of the core pillars of any mindfulness practice is quite simply curiosity. Here's my simple invitation to you, friends. Imagine more. Imagine better. And what I choose to know is, what does that look and feel like for you? Welcome to your new playground. Welcome to your feast. Join me and my special guests next week when we explore with you a powerful method and practice of overcoming overwhelm while transforming your time management into time mastery. I am your friend and host, George E. Green, and this is your Mindfulness Advantage. Thanks for being with us tonight, friends, and we'll see you next week.